Welcome back. ORBX just released a new airport, their 100th payware product as a matter of fact. You know, I really love it when I see sceneries for places that I have been, or that I have some connection to. Today we'll be looking at Parry Sound Area Municipal Airport. Parry Sound is located in the province of Ontario, Canada. The sound itself is an appendage of Georgian Bay, which is off of Lake Huron, one of the Great Lakes, shared treasures of Canada and the USA. I grew up in western New York, and when I was a kid, we had a 1971 30-foot Revelcraft cabin cruiser that my dad had purchased for dirt cheap. Dirt cheap because it was basically an empty shell with no working mechanicals. My dad basically rebuilt the boat, and we kept plying the waters of Lake Ontario, the Erie Canal, the St. Lawrence River, and the Trent Severn Waterway for 20 years after. Port Severn is the northern terminus of the Trent Severn, the southern end being Trenton on Lake Ontario. We would take trips up the Trent Severn, stopping in places like Peterborough, Kirkfield, both of which have really cool lift locks, and right before Port Severn, one must go over a marine railway. It is quite the boating adventure. Parry Sound is north along Georgian Bay from Port Severn, and we would sometimes make bonus travel and head up there. One time at Parry Sound, we hit rocks, took out the propeller, and damaged the rudder. After fairly costly repairs and an extended vacation, we made our way back home. Not content with just fixing the drivetrain, my dad, after our return, cut out a section of the hull, fabbed a fiberglass tunnel drive, and inserted it back into the hull, and then redirected the shafting to accommodate. We weren't going to take out the drivetrain hitting rocks ever again. When acquiring this airport, one is struck by how small the file is compared to most ORBX airport. It is a fairly small coverage area. Most of the preceding shots of Parry Sound itself in the fall are simply FTX Global textures, and most importantly, vector, to give definition to the extreme coastline of Georgian Bay and the multitude of lakes in that part of Ontario. It is nice of ORBX to branch out beyond the typical mountains and fjords sceneries. Ontario is indeed pretty flat, although evidence of prior glaciation is clear, having cut the terrain extensively. Vector does a good job picking up the coastlines, islands, and lakes. I hadn't flown in this part of the world before getting this, but when Open Land Class North America comes out, I'm sure this area will be further improved over default. I had pretty high settings in place, in fact, the same as Homer, Alaska, except mesh was at 5 meters and therefore no 3D water. That said, with those settings, frames were well below Homer, mostly being in the high 20s or low 30s, whereas Homer was never below the 30s and was frequently locked at 40. So it is a little harder on the frames than someplace in Alaska, which I attribute primarily to more roads and traffic and more building autogen, although not exactly metropolitan. are a few minor glitches that appeared. Some flickering trees here and there, and a water anomaly to the south of the runway. There it is. But nothing that can't be taken care of quickly. The landscape does indeed remind me of Ontario, though. I guess that's probably one of the best things you can say about any scenery in flight sim. I did have a significant crosswind coming in for landing. One would think that the runway would be a little more east-west in this area rather than north-south. But hey, it just adds to the challenge. The photo texture imagery at the airport frankly didn't impress me too much. Typically I expect higher resolution imagery from ORBX, but I'm sure availability and price of the source imagery played a role here. The airport doesn't appear to have a control panel, but it is well stocked with attractive objects and lots of static aircraft. The latter is definitely a benefit to performance, because the airport looks full without having AI traffic. In both FSX and P3D, I hate how my computer has to process AI aircraft hundreds of miles away. Among the objects are loads of RVs, which adds to the notion of this being Ontario's cottage country, being a sort of getaway from the Toronto metro area and those intrepid Americans who venture that far north. Well, I hope you enjoyed our visit to Parry Sound, Ontario. If you like what you saw, please hit like and don't forget to subscribe. Au revoir.